clear on who I am and what I'm supporting.
Do you think this could be a mix-up of names?
There are some Ellis friends that I have, and I won't mention them because I don't want to get anybody else involved, but it's hard to mix me with them.
Bishop Charles Ellis, once admired by millions, now faces allegations that threaten both his reputation and legacy. What began as whispers behind closed doors has grown into a controversy involving power, accountability, and trust. From questions about leadership to concerns over influence and privilege, the unfolding story has sparked difficult conversations about faith, authority, and the responsibilities that come with both. The core controversy emerges. Bishop Charles Ellis, once a commanding presence in the Pentecostal community, found himself thrust into a storm of controversy that quickly escalated beyond private church walls. The catalyst was a moment caught live on stage during the funeral of gospel legend Aretha Franklin. What was meant to be a solemn tribute turned into a spectacle of discomfort when Ellis was seen placing his hand on pop star Ariana Grande in a way that sparked immediate outrage. Although some initially wondered if it was an accident or misjudgment, the prolonged nature of the gesture and the visible unease on Grande's face suggested something far more problematic. This public incident shattered the carefully maintained image of Ellis as a respected spiritual leader and opened the door for critical examination of his behavior and leadership. The fallout was swift and intense. Social media erupted with hashtags demanding respect and accountability, drawing the attention of mainstream news outlets across the country. The story was no longer just about a single moment. It had become a symbol of deeper issues within church leadership. Women's rights advocates, pastors, and cultural commentators questioned how such a breach of respect could occur in a sacred setting and remained unaddressed. Public trust began to erode as many started to ask if this moment was an isolated lapse or symptomatic of a pattern hidden behind the pulpit. Bishop Ellis's initial response did little to quell the storm. His attempt to dismiss the controversy with a joke about Ariana Grande's name fell flat, coming off as tone-deaf and dismissive rather than remorseful. When he did issue an apology, it was vague and conditional, leaving many to question his sincerity and grasp of the seriousness of the situation. The hesitancy to take full responsibility further fueled criticism from both within and outside his congregation. His leadership, once unquestioned, now faced an unprecedented test. Behind the scenes, those closest to the church observed a shift in atmosphere. The scandal exposed more than just an uncomfortable moment on stage. It became a flashpoint that revealed simmering tensions and long-held frustrations among members and staff. People began speaking out privately and publicly about experiences they previously kept silent. The controversy forced a reckoning with the broader dynamics of power, respect, and accountability in Ellis's ministry. While the public debate raged, the internal cracks in Greater Grace Temple's foundation were becoming impossible to ignore. Yet, even as the controversy expanded, Ellis maintained his position, supported by some loyal followers unwilling to believe the allegations could define him. This stubborn hold on power deepened divisions and complicated any chance for restorative work within the church community. The question on many lips was no longer just about whether Ellis had crossed a line, but about how the church would deal with the consequences of that crossing. Suspicion and mistrust loomed large as more voices prepared to challenge the status quo. The community's response was mixed. While some saw the incident as a momentary lapse in judgment, others recognized it as confirmation of deeper issues that had long been ignored. The scandal forced a public conversation about the role of power in spiritual leadership and the need for greater transparency and humility. What started as an uncomfortable viral moment now threatened to become a watershed event for ministry accountability nationwide. Despite all this unrest, the full extent of what was transpiring remained under wraps. The media glare illuminated one incident, but it was clear that the story was far more complex and darker than the headlines suggested. The eyes of the nation were watching, but the inner workings of Greater Grace Temple and the true nature of Ellis's leadership were only beginning to surface. The most significant revelations were still to come. The legacy Ellis inherited was formidable, and that history helps explain how his rise took shape. Legacy and rise of Bishop Ellis. Bishop Charles H. Ellis III didn't really step into his role unprepared. It was like the whole thing had weight already. His path got shaped by a powerful legacy, and you can feel that in how the story moves. His father, Bishop David L. Ellis Sr., started Greater Grace Temple in Detroit, and that spiritual home grew into one of the largest Pentecostal churches in the United States. Or so it seemed. When Bishop David passed away, the responsibility to carry the mantle fell right on Charles's shoulders. No soft landing. The expectations were enormous, and so was the congregation's hope that he would honor and expand the church's influence in a way that kept it moving forward. At the start, Ellis seemed more than able to handle that sort of challenge. Under his direction, Greater Grace Temple got changed from a neighborhood church into something way more cultural plus spiritual, like a whole machine. Membership kept swelling into the thousands. Satellite ministries grew outward, and the church's media footprint just kept multiplying. So the reach went far beyond Detroit, not like before. And Ellis, well, he was a preacher, but also a showman in a steady way, mixing magnetic messages with a dramatic stage presence. It pulled in not only the faithful parishioners, but celebrities too, and even political figures. A big part of his rise also seemed tied to how he blended older spiritual authority with a modern corporate approach to managing the church. He went for sleek branding, used media with purpose, and leaned into celebrity endorsements that kept everything in the public eye. To plenty of observers, this looked like forward thinking and real momentum. Church as an empire, with Ellis acting like the visionary architect. The overall impression was prosperity, prominence, and that calm message of God's favor in their eyes, even if it was mostly staged. Well, you know how it goes. What many didn't catch in the beginning was how fast success, plus a bigger name, changed the internal climate of Greater Grace Temple. Behind the charismatic sermons and the polished productions, some longtime members and staff quietly sensed a turn away from the simple foundations Ellis's father had laid. The emphasis seemed to drift from meeting the congregation's spiritual needs to basically holding up a high-profile brand. That quiet shift would end up being pretty important for reading how everything unraveled right after. Ellis's leadership kind of mixed spiritual authority with strategic maneuvering. More and more decisions were treated like calculations, sure, with prayerful guidance in the mix, but also with public image in mind. Political connections mattered too, and financial results were weighed alongside it all. This combination, ministry with management, was both an advantage and a weakness. It pushed the church to new heights, but at the same time it planted seeds of distrust and dissatisfaction inside the ranks. The cracks in the whole structure were starting to show, even while the spotlight kept getting brighter on its leader. These tensions laid the groundwork for what was about to come. Changes in priorities and values soon became impossible to ignore. Signs of shifting priorities. As Bishop Ellis's tenure progressed, members of Greater Grace Temple started noticing subtle but significant changes in the church's atmosphere and leadership approach. What had once felt like a close-knit spiritual family began to take on the appearance of a large corporate operation focused heavily on spectacle and revenue. The altar calls, previously heartfelt moments of connection, started to seem scripted. Prayer services looked increasingly like theatrical productions designed for broadcast rather than worship. Many congregants felt the warmth of the ministry was giving way to a polished presentation. The growing emphasis on luxury and grandeur became a lightning rod for criticism. Ellis often defended his expensive suits, exotic vehicles, and lavish church productions as expressions of presenting God in excellence. For him, quality and style were integral to glorifying God and attracting new believers. However, more voices within the community expressed discomfort, suggesting that pride and ego were taking precedence over genuine humility and service. This tension exposed a gap between leadership's vision and the expectations of many churchgoers. Staff turnover added another layer of concern. Assistant ministers and longtime employees quietly departed, some citing burnout, others hinting at discomfort with a leadership style that seemed less about servanthood and more about celebrity. Reports circulated of decisions being driven by politics, profit, and image management, rather than spiritual discernment. This shift eroded morale behind the scenes and left parts of the church feeling fragmented. What had once been a unified ministry was now wrestling with internal fractures. Financial transparency, or the lack of it, also became a contentious issue. Multiple insiders whispered about vague accounting practices and questionable expenditures, including private trips and five-star accommodations allegedly covered by church funds. Though these allegations were never fully disclosed to the public, they planted seeds of doubt within the congregation. Questions about where money was going and who it was benefiting started to overshadow sermons and mission statements. For many, trust in stewardship began to waver. Among the most painful effects was the departure of older members, those who had been pillars of the church community during Bishop David Ellis's era. Some left quietly in disappointment, feeling the soul of the church was slipping away. Others attempted to confront Bishop Charles Ellis, urging a return to the foundational principles of servant leadership and spiritual intimacy. Their appeals, however, reportedly went unheeded, deepening a sense of alienation and loss among longtime believers. The church's public image, meanwhile, remained carefully managed. Flashy promotional videos, high-profile worship events, and well-known celebrity guests continued to paint a picture of success and divine favor. But behind the scenes, the spiritual foundation was cracking. Congregants whispered in pews and hallways about an increasing disconnect between what was preached and what was practiced. The church was beginning to resemble a spiritual empire, with Ellis firmly on the throne, but the kingdom itself was fragile. The unfolding scandal and internal unrest were not isolated phenomena, but pieces of a much wider transformation that would upend everything built so far. Allegations behind the scenes. As public scrutiny intensified, it kind of felt like a flood of troubling accounts started coming out of Greater Grace Temple, like from inside, revealing that distressing pattern underneath the polished face they showed. Former church members, especially women, began sharing stories of spiritual manipulation and inappropriate behavior that went way past the well-publicized incident on stage. These testimonies described subtle but stubborn violations of personal boundaries, and they were often packaged as spiritual counsel or mentorship. What was first little whispers quickly turned into a full chorus, people insisting they needed to be heard. A lot of them recounted moments where compliments about appearance, or maybe even body language, were presented as encouragement. But there was this undercurrent of unease that nobody could fully shake. And when someone tried to step back, they were met with accusations that they were too sensitive or that they were spiritually immature, basically shutting down their concerns before they could really land. The psychological toll was deep, so deep that individuals started doubting their own perceptions until they noticed others had the same kind of thing happen too. That widespread atmosphere of doubt and shame highlighted a troubling misuse of authority, and it didn't just sit there quietly. Some former staff and volunteers spoke anonymously about a leadership style that kind of blurred professional and personal lines, really like it got tangled. There were extended hugs, unsolicited comments on women's appearances, and this steady pressure to show up for private meetings after hours. Over time, it became this unspoken pattern that people recognized but didn't quite put into words. One former choir member described a troubling moment where a pastoral meeting went from spiritual guidance to probing personal questions about dating life, and the vows of purity, too. That same conversation also came with offers of special protection, and not in a casual way. The power dynamic was so lopsided that refusing felt almost impossible, because the fear of reprisal was always there. Taken together, it felt like Ellis's influence acted as a kind of shield and enabled misconduct. When people tried to raise concerns inside the church hierarchy, they met resistance, dismissals, or outright threats. Women who reported issues were sometimes called disrespectful, or they were accused of lying, with the goal of weakening the ministry by undermining the report. What these revelations did was draw a portrait of an institution struggling to line up its public image with its internal realities. Even with public appearances of vigor and success, the community's spiritual and emotional health was in crisis. The more people came forward, the clearer it became that what looked like separate incidents were really part of a bigger pattern, an abuse of power that spread across the space. That pattern mattered not only for the people directly affected, but also for the church's integrity as a whole. Adding to the distress, leaked internal communications made it seem like church leaders were already aware of formal complaints filed against Ellis before the public scandal even really took off. Still, no proper, deep investigations happened. Instead, victims were often told to forgive and pray. That kind of answer, it felt like, put reputation first and justice. Healing, more or less second. So naturally, it stirred up skepticism about whether the institution actually cared about accountability. In a lot of ways, the church's quietness became kind of a piece of the problem itself. While the voices inside the church grew louder, the public and media called for clarity amid the unfolding crisis. Crisis management and public response. As the scandal grew, Bishop Ellis's response became a major source of controversy. His early attempts to downplay the situation with humor were widely criticized, and later apologies were viewed by many as vague and insufficient. Rather than easing concerns, his handling of the issue deepened public skepticism and raised questions about accountability. Media coverage quickly expanded beyond the original incident, bringing attention to allegations of financial concerns, internal conflicts, and criticism from former members. The growing scrutiny increased pressure on both Ellis and Greater Grace Temple to provide clear answers. Within the congregation, opinions became sharply divided. Some members remained loyal, pointing to Ellis's years of ministry and leadership. Others, particularly younger members and women, questioned whether the church was doing enough to address concerns and ensure a safe environment. Critics also focused on the church's lack of a visible investigation or transparent disciplinary process. The absence of clear action left many wondering whether leadership was more concerned with protecting the institution than addressing the allegations. Despite the controversy, Ellis continued preaching and appearing at conferences, further fueling debate. Supporters saw his continued ministry as proof of resilience, while critics viewed it as a sign that serious concerns were being ignored. Social media campaigns and advocacy groups kept the story in public discussion long after the initial headlines faded. These efforts amplified calls for greater transparency, accountability, and reform within churches and ministries. The controversy ultimately became part of a larger conversation about power, celebrity culture, and oversight in religious institutions. For many observers, the case highlighted the risks of unchecked authority and the need for stronger governance within faith communities. The ripples of this crisis continue to spread, raising urgent questions about the future of church leadership and the safeguards needed to protect vulnerable communities. The larger implications for church leadership. Bishop Charles Ellis' downfall feels like a warning, about what goes wrong when spiritual leadership has no real accountability, like none. In his case, there's a clear point, the kind people usually miss when they only look at charisma. And it is tied to a bigger issue, the thing we can see in a lot of religious institutions, where charisma, influence, and even public image can start to weigh more than humility, transparency, and personal character, maybe a bit too much. The scandal has brought up serious questions about authority inside the church. When powerful leaders act without the proper oversight, congregations can get exposed to financial, emotional, or spiritual harm pretty easily. Because of that, churches really need stronger checks and balances, clearer reporting systems, and leadership structures that actually safeguard both the members and the ministers, not just the reputation. Ellis's story also kind of shows the danger of celebrity culture in ministry. When pastors start acting like brands, the actual mission of service can slide off, like image management takes over, along with luxury and that sort of personal influence. Instead of leaning into spiritual care, some leaders begin to feel pressured to guard their reputation at any cost, even if it means ignoring what should be done. And the bigger lesson, it really can't stay stuck on just one person. Churches need transparency in finances, in decisions, and in pastoral conduct. Members ought to feel safe asking questions, raising concerns, and speaking up without worrying about backlash or quiet punishment. Real church leadership is not about power, fame, or rank. It's a sacred responsibility that grows from humility, service, and accountability. Ellis's downfall becomes this cautionary tale for every faith community. Trust has to be protected, not exploited. In the end, this crisis isn't only one leader's failure. It's an invitation for churches to look at their own systems, face those uncomfortable truths, and rebuild credibility through integrity, compassion, and real faith. Bishop Ellis's downfall is a powerful wake-up call for church leadership everywhere. It reminds us that character and accountability matter more than titles and fame. If you found this story enlightening, please like and subscribe for more deep dives into important topics. Your support helps keep these vital conversations alive. Thank you for watching.